Hello there, welcome back. Now, today I'm going to be talking about uh, four films from World War II: The Battle of Britain, Battle of the Bulge, Longest Day, and The Bridge Too Far. After this video, I'll stop and start and come back and also talk about films like Fat City and then The Fall of Achill Castle. So, I've got a few I'll be doing today. But before we start, I'll go into what my plans are for videos. Generally, I plan to finish off the Tarkovsky series. There's only two left. There's Andrei Rublev and there's the Sacrifice. So I plan to do them, finish them off. Obviously, I get sidetracked because of life. I plan to look into Buñuel films pretty soon. That's kind of intimidating for me because he's one of my favourite directors, so it's kind of tricky to do some of his films. I will also continue something I did a while ago and have stopped, but I'm now going to come back to is some of the Alan Clark stuff. I'm going to go look into his 70's work and some of his early 80's work that I haven't covered yet. So I went pretty fast into his stuff and then I kind of stopped for Christmas and never went back. But I'm now kind of interested in trying to do more of his stuff. I've got more of Werner Herzog to do, which I'll just do at my normal pace, which is dead slow and stop. But I will be doing more. I'll be doing these two because a Finnish person has been torturing me. So I will be doing these soon. I will watch these soon. Ish. You know, I might delete a little bit just to torture them a bit more. But my plan is to cover them. But now I'm going to go into the films that I want to cover for this, which is basically these four films I've already suggested, right? So I'll start with the earliest one. The earliest one's The Longest Day. And it's probably the most famous of the four, at least internationally. I mean, A Bridge Too Far is fairly famous in Britain and Europe because it took place here during World War II, and it was about an Allied expansion. There's a lot of British people involved, and The Bridge Too Far was made by a lot of British people, and it's a very British idea of something that failed. So that's very British, especially post-World War II. Battle of the Bulge and the Battle of Britain are both films are based on famous historical events that weren't the most successful films. I mean, they both starred Robert Shaw, and he's the best part of both of them, but they were not big successes. There's some actors who go through these films and different ones. So Robert Shaw in Battle of Britain and Battle of the Bulge, Michael Caine in A Bridge Too Far in Battle of Britain, Sean Connery in The Longest Day in A Bridge Too Far. Edward Fox shows up in one or two of them. He's in Battle of Britain and A Bridge Too Far. And there's probably more in the background. It's like sitting act. I mean, basically, if you're a working actor in Britain, you're going to be in one or two of these movies, most likely. Doug Bogart shows up in A Bridge Too Far. And I'm really amazed he wasn't in more. But he was more making Visconti films and Lucy films, I suppose. But I'm actually just amazed he wasn't in more. That's quite astonishing. He's only in one of these films. It kind of shocked me because I expected to turn up even a small part. I mean, Laurence Olivier is in A Bridge Too Far in Battle of Britain as well. So, I mean, it just goes on and on. Right, so start with The Longest Day. The Longest Day is, for me, the kind of least interesting of these, even though I enjoy it. It is about D-Day, but it's not like Saving Private Ryan. Saving Private Ryan was about D-Day for 20 minutes, where basically it was Omaha Beach, where they were part of the crew that went in and get bogged down on the beach. This film takes place with the whole operation, because D-Day was not just Omaha Beach. D-Day was quite a few beaches along Normandy, and paratroopers flowed in and dropped behind enemy lines to take certain places and hold it until they get back up. So the Germans were going to get surrounded. So there was a plan. And this was a very successful operation, but not everything went right, obviously, because Omaha Beach was a slaughter fest. And the flaws of the film is, one, there's not one director over it. It's a producer film. There's a few different directors, 3 different units. I mean, the one that would go on beyond this was Ken Anakin or Akinen, whatever. He also did Battle of the Bulge. And he was an old school second unit director who did these stuff. So he went in and did some really good battle shots here, which got him other work. But mainly as a producer, you can tell it's a producer film because there's some bizarre comedy in here that's not linked in any other way to the film, which is just weird. It's just a weird situation, but it's there. It's just one of those things. It gets in the way sometimes, and other times it's fine. But as the film goes on, it needed like comedy that was a bit more interesting rather than the same repeated things of how buffoonish some of the Nazis were and how buffoonish some of the French were. You know, it just became a bit like the authority figure became a standing joke, and it worked better when there was more subtle humour. And some of the characterizations are trying to make this for everyone to identify with these young troops, and they made one or two of the characterizations a bit broad in a way that kind of got in the way because they went so broad, it wasn't very specific to a character, so you just felt you were told this person's important because it's you type of thing, and the character itself was vague and you couldn't really get behind them. Like the characters in this film that work better, the characters played by character actors who have something to chew on, really. So even though John Wayne's in it, he's way too old for the part he's playing. Playing a paratrooper who goes in behind enemy lines and helps take a town, and he gets injured and he has to do his stuff. That's the least plausible character in the film. But because John Wayne knows how to hold a screen and knows how to be a leader on screen, it's still enjoyable to see him in the film. It's just that he's in the wrong parts. But they needed a part where he could be seen and could be doing something. So it's just the whole thing of the paratrooper thing is like, no, he's too old. He's just way too old. He'd be a general somewhere, but they actually try and force him in. And that's kind of that kind of mixed bag where, you know, he stands out as not being realistic, but he's got screen persona that actually makes it work. You've also got Robert Mitchum as a guy leading the troops on Omaha Beach. Again, too old. But again, great screen presence. He works better than Wayne because, one, he's not, but they're not asking him to like be someone who's getting in a parachute. He's actually going on my beach and he's ordering the people. Even though he's too old for that, he's still doing it. He's ordering people around. This is how we're going to do this, how we're going to do that. Eddie Albert's also in there doing the same thing. He looks more realistic. But because it's Mitchum and he's got a grace to him and he's also a very good actor and he can suggest subtlety, it works as a representation of an older class of people who were probably in the war, who understood the war. So I don't think Mitchum actually served, but he understood the wartime kind of person. I'm not sure if he served, to be honest. But he was most successful cast, even though it's a ridiculous casting. It's an old style Hollywood thing of someone who's way too old for the part being in it. But it still kind of works because you have someone in authority in that position, which means that section of the film has someone who can be told things, can give orders, and you actually have a sense of the structure of the second half of the film. So that works to a degree. And there's a lot of things I like about this film. It does go into with the Germans and what they were thinking, where they were weak, where they were strong. A lot of them were still thinking it was going to come from the Dunkirk area because it was the smallest land distance. And others was no, it's Normandy. Normandy's got more space from to actually attack. It was Normandy. So the Germans were spread out a bit more than they should have been, which didn't help them. Also, Hitler was asleep when it happened, so they couldn't get orders done. So you get a lot of detail, you get a lot of the sense of arrogance, and somehow some people say they're not going to attack Geneva. Well, it's too bad. And So you see the Germans' mistakes. The Germans never become characters that are that complicated, but you get the idea of who they are throughout the film. But it's mainly with American soldiers. And with the American soldiers, it's a mixed bag, really. You get, there's a character who wins a lot in gambling early on, and he tries to lose all the money, and he thinks he's unlucky, and he's gone through this whole day not shooting anybody. And the character should have worked, but needed a different actor. I need a better actor to really deliver it. Then you've got other bits where Jeffrey Hunter turns up, who's a more experienced actor. And you're thinking, yeah, they could have had him in more, really. It would have worked better if he was in more of it, because he just had the gravitas of an actor who was young but could actually keep your attention. And he's in it for like 10 minutes in one scene with Mitchum when they trying to blow up a bit in Omaha Beach to get everyone through, and he gets killed. And there's a bit earlier on the ship. And that's the kind of person they needed there. Instead of got these young actors who are not quite experienced and not quite interesting enough, you get Robert Wagner as one of the guys who are going to on the beach as well. And he's fine because he's doing an action sequence bit there as well, trying to up this cliff, which is interesting. So there's lots of things going on. There's some really interesting stuff going on with when they drop into the town by mistake, because of it's such a small window of where they can land, and there's a swamp nearby. And of course, because of the weather, some of them drift over the town where the Germans are already at. So a lot of the men get killed early. But they still restructure everything, and even though they're all blown all over the place, they end up coming together and taking the town anyway. So it shows you the problems they have. You see them at a bridge as well, keeping the bridge. The British are holding the bridge. You've got comic relief stuff with the Scottish soldiers coming in with a bagpipe player, which is just too broad for this film. I try to add humour to it, but it just doesn't work. It's played as broad. I mean, there are Scottish troopers who have the bagpipes with them as they go into war, but the way it's shot in this one is just too broad. It just doesn't work. And there's lots of really good stuff here. It's just that it doesn't really, because you don't have one person in charge. It's a producer in charge, not a director. You see a lot of footage coming together, and the build of scene to scene isn't as cohesive as it needs to be. And that's the problem. It's kind of bitty. There's no central character. You're waiting the cameos to actually make it interesting. And even then, the kind of bigger stars like John Wayne or Mitchum, they come into it, then they stop for a while, and then they come back into it. You get other cameos. You've already been down a nice little scene on a boat, then you see them later on the beach. There's stuff like that works quite nicely. There's a terrific bit where Richard Burton turns up. Now, Burton and Rory McDowell were both on Cleopatra, and they were bored at the skull because they were there for ages not filming anything. So they sneaked over to, because it was the same studio, they sneaked over to the set of Longest Day and begged for a job so they could do some acting for a while because they were so bored. So they end up doing these little parts in the film or doing Cleopatra, and those are the best scenes in the film. It just showed you what an hungry actor can do if they give him some decent parts. Like, Burton's the best part of the film. He shows up at the beginning and at the end, and they're the two best scenes in the film. Like, at the beginning, you find out he's a flyer from RAF, and he survived Battle of Britain, and he's one of the people he survived it with has died over the ocean. So he's one of the last few people from Battle of Britain, and that's still flying. So you see this sense of loss over the Brits, and Burton plays it beautifully, because Burton can do he's a great voice, but he also can do the grander stuff, but also the emotion below the surface that's bubbling up. Then at the end, he runs into one of the young soldiers who survived the day without shooting anybody, and it gives a terrific speech about how absurd the whole thing is, and now here he is crippled and just talking for like 3 or 4 minutes, and it's wonderful. It's just like masterclass in acting. It's what you get with something like Rob Mitchum as well. It's like sometimes they don't have the best stuff, but they do it so well that it's like, what? It's really great to watch. So that's what the film has, is these little moments. But the overall, it's a bit too big, it's a bit too cumbersome, and they do need a director to bring it together, and it doesn't have one. It has a bunch of directors. So every director is basically the second unit director for certain scenes. They interact with the actors and do the scenes. You've got Henry Fonda showing up for a little bit. You've got bits and bobs of people showing up, but there's no cohesiveness, no sense of direction. There's things in there that are put in because the producer likes them, not because it would make a good film. But it's still an enjoyable film. It's just that you still want a good DD film. There really hasn't. The films with DD in it have been the Big Red One, Saving Private Ryan. They've had films with it in it, but it's never been the main subject. Apart from this one's a bit broad, and you could it'd be nice to see a newer film made that actually would be a bit more realistic. So that's the Longest Day. Now we go to the Battle of the Bulge. I'm taking it in order of when the films were released, not the order of when they took place in the war, because that would be just too confusing. So the next film made was Battle of the Bulge, where one of the second directors, Ken Anakin or Anakin or whatever, became the director of this film. And I like this. This one's got a lot of historical mistakes made, but I like it more than Longest Day, which is far more historically accurate. And the reason I like it more than that film is, one, you have some central characters going through the film. Even though the film's very fictitious and it says something happened over months, taking place over days, that's a big mistake. But you have central characters, and you can follow those characters through the time. And it has suspense elements to it. So basically, the Battle of the Bulge is where the Germans are on the run from D-Day. They've been pushed back to Germany. They're going to do one final counteroffensive to push the Allies way back, and then the war can stabilize for them, and they can. Their idea is that by doing this, they can then kind of have time to get some technology ready so they can fight back. Now, this film is like, is this realistic or not? It doesn't seem that realistic. This is they're losing. But it's about partially about the Germans' determination to keep fighting, or some of them, and partially about the Americans pushing forward and not seeing the signs that they're going to be a counteroffensive. They think they're going to win now. They think the push has happened. They're going to win. And it's a kind of weird situation for them because they're not paying attention to the details. So Henry Fonda plays a character who's basically a detective in real life. Now he's come to the war, and he's spotting a lot of stuff that doesn't make sense. And he's like, this is. So he's an officer, but he's going against the other officers. He's talking to Robert Ryan, who is the guy in charge. He's saying, so that this stuff doesn't make sense. They're going to do a counterattack, and everyone else is saying, no, they won't. And of course, Henry Fonda turns out to be right, and he gets caught in the front lines because he's doing a research thing for the Robert Ryan to find out what happened, if this thing's going to happen. He's with Charles Bronson's troops when it happens, and then you have to get all the way back to the line and be part of the defensive battle to take down the Germans. Now, this one got hammered for historical inaccuracies. They shot in an area that did not look like Central Europe. There was no trees. It was shot in Spain, and Germany's full of trees. Germany's full of. It was winter, so it was like snow. There was some sequences with snow, but it was. Battle of the Bulge was famous for being a really tough fight because it took place over time in terrible weather, and they finally defeated the Germans and pushed them back, and then they could do the final push into Berlin through Germany. And that's after this collapse. That's where the Germans started to slowly collapse, and people started to break apart and make a run for it, and do deals with the Americans to avoid getting shot and stuff like that. So this is a big defeat. but they try and make it a thriller at the same time, which they don't have to do. But it's just one of those films that, despite the fact there's lots of stuff here that's wrong, they're trying to compress it into a film, and they're compressing characters. So the Henry Fonda character goes from the front line to the back and all over the place as researchers find information out, and he's obviously 3 or 4 different characters from reality who are getting orders, and so in this one he's going back and forward, and basically it feels like going to the front of Germany and come all the way back into France and all the rest of it doesn't take very long, and it takes longer than you'd think, especially in the 1940s. And it's just that kind of thing, is that you can sense that some of this is not quite logical. But it's still a fun World War II movie. That's what's going for it. If you ignore the historical facts and realize this is not exactly the Battle of the Bulge, this is a very vague version of it, you have a lot of fun. You have Telly Savalas as a tank commander who's dealing with trying to run a black market operation during the war to avoid going back poor, and he's getting savaged by the war. You've got Henry Fonda as a guy trying to work it all out. You've got Charles Bronson as a guy who's trying to actually protect his troops and win the war, and he just is sick of the Germans at this point. And he just wants to kill them all at this point. So it's kind of funny watching Charles Bronson and Henry Fonda play people who get on well enough. I mean, Fonda's more of the liberal character who doesn't like Bronson's idea of to kill them all. But they both respect each other as soldiers who are trying to win the war. And it's funny watching them actually being like friendly to each other after you've seen them once upon a time in the West with the mortal enemies. It's kind of weird. But Bronson's terrific. This is Bronson before the 70s, where he became old. Because Bronson in the 60s felt still fairly young and tough looking, and then the 70s age hit pretty brutally to him. This is still when he was younger, and he felt like a force of nature just coming through the screen. So he's like the most vibrant person on the Allied ranks through the film. But Robert Ryan as the general, who's always good. What's Robert Ryan? What do you expect? And on the German side, you've got Robert Shaw. Robert Shaw steals the film. Robert Shaw's the best part of the film by a mile. He's played this commander. He's been through all the war. He's been in the Russian front. He's been brought here to basically lead the attack because he gets results. And as you go through the film, you see he's a fanatic for fighting the war. He does not believe that they're going to win this thing. He doesn't think they've got a chance in hell of winning this war. He doesn't care. He just wants to fight. That's what his juice is. He fights. That's a fighter. Tactically winning. Where other men get killed all around him, he will fight. So he's the kind of person they have to kill to stop the Battle of the Bulge. So it's basically, instead of stopping German army, stop Robert Shaw. Which I don't know about you, but that's a good thing for a movie. Stop Robert Shaw. That's with a blonde look that's very much from Russia with Love. And he's great in it. He's so much fun. He's got a person who gets him his food and helps him through because he's such a high general, and this person slowly gets disillusioned with him over time. So that relationship is the most interesting relationship in the film. So, I mean, that's when the Germans are the more interesting characters, ultimately. I mean, Henry Fonda's trying his best, but, there's basically limitations to what he can do with the part. So he is limited, Henry Fonda. So yeah, he does what he can really to get some interest. But Robert Shaw is a thing in this film. So Battle of the Bulge is enjoyable Hawking based on the fact. There's another one where I wish there was a more accurate film based on it to watch, because it is a fascinating part of the war. Like, that's the kind of frustration of these films, as the war is fascinating and doing the fictionalized version is difficult. So now we're going on to the Battle of Britain. This is, I think, the worst film of the bunch. It's directed by Guy Hamilton, who was one of the Bond directors. But he's one of those directors who gets a lot of praise because he directed Goldfinger. Even though he didn't write Goldfinger and he didn't produce it, he directed it, even though it was something that was read. Obviously, Bond had already been 2 films in by the time we got to Goldfinger. And, Terence Young had figured out most of it. So, but Guy Hamilton got the thing was, this is the best Bond film. I prefer Wish with Love, to be honest. And it was, Goldfinger was a lot of fun, but it's not perfect. And Guy Hamilton kind of managed to use that and actually keep in work. He directed some of the Roger Moore Bond films. He directed Diamonds Are Forever, which are some of the weaker films. He did Force 10 from Navarone, which was not a great film. Very enjoyable, but not very good. He kind of had one of those careers that were kind of like, they were okay. They weren't amazing films. He was basically a working director who wasn't as talented as other people who maybe had less budgets than him. So, and in this one, this is a film where I said in Longest Day they needed a director. In this film, they needed a producer to force some sort of shape to the project, because it's been directed to have all these shots that are cool of the airplanes, of this happening, of that happening, of just different things going on that would be interesting visually. But there's no progression through the film. You just feel you watch a film that's a bit bitty. Like, this character appears, then disappears, and this character appears and disappears. Michael Caine dies in the film, and I didn't know he was dead in the film. That's how vague the storytelling is. Robert Shaw's the nominal lead, but he pops in and out throughout the film. You see some other actors you recognise. Ian McShane's in it, the young man is in it, and a very young man performance, which means he's not very polished, but he's not bad either. There's a bunch of other actors. There's a well-known Scottish actor, James Cosmo, is very young in this film. Very, very young. You recognise him from he's in every medieval film ever. Ginger hair, he's always in everything. Braveheart, he's, Game of Thrones, he's in everything. He's in this one, a young man. Michael Caine shows up. Laurence Olivier is a guy in charge of the wings, of having them in charge of the operation. You've got Christopher Plummer, who's in and out of the film he's highly billed in the film, but he's not actually in it that much. He's a storyline that doesn't really go anywhere. He's in a relationship with Sally York, who's his wife, and they've been split up, and she's in it more than he is, and she's more interesting than he is, and it's like you've Christopher Plummer, why don't you give him something good to do? He's a good actor. What the hell? He just gets shafted in this film. So does Michael Caine, actually. Michael Caine's a couple of little moments, and he gets kicked to the side too. I try to show the leaders and show the people below them as they evolve through the war. As how some people start out as naive young soldiers, young pilots, become in charge of their brigade by the end of it, as they fight this constant war against the Germans, and how the Germans are getting knocked down day after day. And the whole idea is the Battle of Britain is not a fight, it's a continual fight in 1940 to battle the Germans, to make them realise that they cannot win. On the air, they cannot win. Like, they may think they can destroy Britain and then travel across and take the land. And it's like, no, you can't win. You cannot beat Britain in the sky, and that's the whole point. Even though Britain's doesn't have as many planes, and have to train pilots, they're still not going to win. That's the whole point. But there's no producer who's pushing that all the way, so you always feel it in the film. Instead, you've got a lot of fight scenes between planes that all look really cool, but you have a lack of direction in the film. You just don't feel like the script's been focused to the point where we shall be looking at. You just feel you've got lots of scenes that are happening and lots of events. And that's what happens when you don't have a strong director in charge of a script, where it just becomes moments of things happening and no one's in charge of the overall film. Harry Saltzman did the Bond films, was the producer. And you'd think he'd have noticed that problem, but obviously hadn't. This was just a film that never came together. I saw it years ago and I rewatched again for this video, and it was the same feeling again watching it. It was like, there's individually good scenes. I like some of the actors, but I don't know why I'm watching. At least half the time, it's like people pop up and disappear. The scenes are in so that because they happen in real life, but there's no shaping of the events around it, so you get a sense of what's the danger early on, what's the danger later on. You get a sense of it in pieces through the film, but you don't get a sense of it being shaped into something like dramatic. This is the most undramatic war movie ever. So lots of really nice shots of the air. I mean, basically that's where you get most of the fun from. Because I was watching the projector, and some of the aerial scenes are terrific, but the drama is just non-existent. So now we go to my favourite of the bunch, which is A Bridge Too Far. A Bridge Too Far is written by Richard Attenborough, and who I'm not really the biggest fan of as a director, but this is probably one of the films that he made that I liked most. It's more brilliant than you'd ever expect from him, and you get a sense that people involved knew what they were aiming for with the film. They knew what the film was going to, like, this is a film we're making, this is what the effect we're going to have, and they focus on that in the film, and that's it. So you may have some scenes maybe not work as well as maybe they'd hoped, but overall you do get a sense of progression, which is what you're missing from these other films. It was written by William Goldman, who was a big writer at the time, who later in his career did a lot of tell-all books about Hollywood. This was when he was still kind of doing good stuff before he kind of went into his kind of peak was really from the mid-60s till the mid-80s, till like The Princess Bride. There may be Misery, but after that the films went way downhill. You know, there was just a lot of bad films there. You know, or films that didn't quite work together. And I mean, the one beyond the mid-80s I liked most is Ghost in the Darkness that he wrote, that isn't a great film, it's just enjoyable trash. So he did have a peak period and then it kind of fell apart. I mean, for me, he never did as many good films or great films as his brother, James Goldman, who wrote Robin and Marion, and They Might Be Giants and stuff like that, who had a more interest, less financially successful, but more interesting. Anyway, but this is one of the ones, the scripts he wrote I quite like, because he kind of respects the book and respects what the thing is. Because this and The Longest Day were both based on books by Cornelius Ryan, and they both have Sean Connery in it. Sean Connery was a bit part in The Longest Day just before he got the Bond part. He was just a bit player in a comedy role. And this one, he's pretty much one of the leads, which is the difference a decade and a half can make. Basically, the two lead actors in this film, it's an all-star cast. There's a lot of actors popping in for a small section of the film and then popping back out. Gene Hackman's in it as a Polish guy. It's ridiculous, but it's Gene Hackman, so you're happy to have him there. Robert Redford pops in for like one sequence. You know, Ryan O'Neill's in it as one of the American generals, and actually it works pretty well. Edward Fox pops in for some bits of the film and pops back out, so is Michael Caine. But the thing with this film, though, as compared to the others, you know why they're popping in and out of the film. The aim is your line of... They've got the plot aim of the film clear, so you know exactly where you're going, so you know why someone's in the film at this point and why they're not in the film later on, or why they're coming back in the film. You can know, like why they're there, why the characters are there. So if someone else was playing that wasn't a star, it would make sense. Because it's a big star, they're there to get people in, but it does make sense. You have stuff with Elliot Gould, James Caan, a lot of nice scenes with all of them. They get to work with different actors as well. But it all kind of works because the two lead actors in the film are Sean Connery and Anthony Hopkins, because they're the two guys at the front. Because the idea of the film is they're going to take these three bridges, these 3 points along the way, and what they're going to do is they're going to drop paratroopers on each section. They're going to take the bridge of each bridge and just steamroller their armory all the way through Holland. And the idea is they're going to get to Arnhem at the end, which is the big bridge to get him over to Germany. And it's like, it's basically a plan that's too ambitious. They should have done 2 bridges because the third bridge had a lot of German artillery there, and it was just too much. And there had been warnings, and the person who gave them the warnings was sent away. They didn't want to hear it. But there was warnings they shouldn't go to the third bridge, and they did. And that was what caused all the tragedy. But the aim of the film is to get to that third bridge. That's the aim of everything. And that simple thing that we can understand is what we get with this, to get The Longest Day, was like, I know exactly where this film is going. I know where it's heading, so every scene is heading to some dead station. Like in Longest Day, we're trying to get these guys off the beach, and we're trying to take the land round about them. So no matter how fragmented it got, you had an idea where you were all the way through the film. So even though it had flaws, you could understand where the film was. But the Bulge, they're just trying to go fast, and there's some more action scenes. And eventually, with that one, the plot mechanic is they're going to run out of petrol, the Germans, and we're just going to annoy them enough to make them have to use up the petrol so they run out. Which again is understandable motivation. It's the way they do it's a bit too generic, but it's understandable. Battle Britain didn't have any of that. It just had the vague fight scenes. This one is the strongest one. It's like, get to that bridge. And then the film is about the frustrations of not getting to the bridge because everything goes wrong trying to get to that bridge. And you're cutting back and forth between Anthony Hopkins and Sean Connery. Anthony Hopkins is at the bridge, trying to keep the bridge. Sean Connery's with the replacements who are going to get to the bridge and help support them, and they cannot get to the bridge. So that's their frustration. They can't get there. So that's one section of the film, and you know exactly where everyone is at all times, and all the frustrations, all the motivations. And you just have to check in on them every so often, and the film works. Yeah. Because those scenes are all great. I mean, any scene with those 2 actors, the leads in that film, is just fun to watch because they know what they're doing. Then every other scene is different departments in the Allied forces, either American or British, trying to get the rest of the team up to the bridge and getting through all these people who are trying to stop them. And it's simple. It's like, okay, someone blew a bridge up when we wanted to hold it. It's not one of the important bridges, but one of the smaller bridges. So Elliot Gould has to build this temporary bridge to get all the people moving. So it takes away like half a day from them. They run into heavy fire. That slows them down. They have to deal with coordinating all of these people going from A to B. That's epic. And that takes time, and no one's planned, so they're pushed a lot too far. And then you cut back, you see the consequences at Arnhem, where people are getting killed because there's no support for them. So you're always getting the problem, then the consequence of the problem, consequence of the problem, and it always makes sense. And Battle of the Bulge had a simplistic version of this, where it was you see the Germans moving forward, and you see the reactions of the Americans to every movement they made, and that gave you the plot. It was too simplistic in that film because he was like, I know that didn't happen, and that's too simplistic for how someone would react. But you get the genre base of it. And Bridge Too Far, you actually get a more complicated thing because you're going from character to character. And then between you've got people like Michael Caine and Ryan O'Neill as the people trying to get them up there, and they're the kind of constants. And Ryan O'Neill's playing a character who's fractured his back, so he's not constant pain throughout the film. And Michael Caine's just trying to get his men forward as quickly as possible because he knows the guys at the front. And he wants to make sure no one gets killed unnecessarily. So you get the feeling of people who this means something to them. And your other characters are James Caan, who's trying to protect his men under bad circumstances. Robert Redford shows up as a guy who leads the attack in the second bridge so they can get over the bridge to try and get to Arnhem. And that has to take place during the daytime in fog and the fake fog and stuff like that. And that's a very dangerous sequence. It works really well. So every sequence, action scene works because there's always a aim for it. Then you see what the problem there is, and then you see them getting around the problem. As you see them getting around the problem, as they try to go through the land and get attacked by the Germans and how brutal it is. So it's a film you always get a sense of where we are, why we're doing this, and what the problem is. And it also is the one film in this that actually justifies its length. Because the longest day is too long. It's 20 minutes too long. Because there's stuff in there, you just cut out the comedy stuff, you just cut out and you'd have a more cohesive film. And cut out some of the characterizations. Because some of the characterizations you get on the run in the longest day is better than the stuff you get 3 or 4 scenes before we go to Omaha Beach. It's one of those things, that one. Battle of the Bulge is too short because it needed to be longer to get more complications in there. It was way too short as a film. And Battle of Britain just needed a bit of script, and it felt way too long. It actually wasn't too long, but it felt too long. The Bridge Too Far, you always get a sense of where we are, why we're doing this, what the consequences in your back, why we're here, what the consequences of what's happened there. And it just works. And because the actual violence is brutal without being over the top, you get a sense that this is a very difficult war for everybody. And the fact is, the soldiers are not like He-Men or anything. They're just people trying to get through a bad situation, trying to survive a war, trying to defeat these scumbag Nazis who they're all tired, they all hate them, they're all going to get the job done. And it's a very kind of working class attitude through this film. It's very British, and we get all these different classes. Like Anthony Hopkins' character is stiff upper lip British, but you also can tell he cares about his men. He's actually very brave and does all the right things. And Sean Connery's a more working class guy, but you get a sense that he's the same way. And so you get the class thing isn't important later on. The only person who's kind of the villain of the thing is Dirk Bogart's character, who should have known better than send him through, who should have actually stood up to Montgomery and said, this won't work. But he never. So he's kind of the most villainous character in the film. But most of the characters you actually like because they're trying to get through a bad situation. So these are 4 films. I would definitely say A Bridge Too Far was very enjoyable. I watched all of these on projector, but Bridge Too Far is the most fun. Longest Day, have some patience, but there is some good stuff there. Battle of the Bulge, good, pulpy fun, ignore reality. But we really need a proper Battle of the Bulge movie. And Battle of Britain, just skip it. It's not. It's one of those films. It sounds like it should be good, and it's not. And it wastes a really good cast. And there's lots of nice scenes in there, but nothing comes together at all. And they spend time building up to stuff and then don't pay it off. And it's like, hell, what's the matter with you? So that's the 4 films. I hope you enjoyed this. I'm going to cut off the live stream right now, but I'll be back in about 2 minutes with a video on Fat City. So I'll be back very soon. So I'll see you soon.